Welcome to part 7 of the Field of Glory Napoleonic Introductory Series. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the movement phase. The first thing you do in the movement phase is dice for the arrival of reinforcements and flank marches, and also talk about the concept of reserves, which you'll remember from the setup rules. So reserves arrive from the back of the table in one of the three sectors. Reserves are not diced for. The player chooses when to bring them on whenever he chooses, in his own movement phase obviously, and they do have to come on though if in your next movement phase, if during the enemy's turn an enemy unit comes within 12 MU of your designated arrival sector, and the sectors being the left, central or right sectors. Then reinforcements similarly also come in from the back of the table, while flank marches obviously come in on the side of the table, either on the left or the right, on your half or in your opponent's half. So reinforcements and flank marches, these must be diced for. You dice from turn 1 at the start of your movement phase, and you roll separately for each off-table division. And you roll 1 dice in turn 1, 2 dice in turn 2, and so on. And you add to those dice the level of your divisional general. So if your general was skilled, your first turn you'd roll 2 dice, and if your general was exceptional, you'd roll 3 dice, and so on, and always requiring a 5 on one of the dice for the division to arrive in the following turn. So then getting on to movement itself, this is the table to look out for in the rules, and some things to note about movement. So troops who assaulted in the assault phase cannot move in the movement phase. Troops who made an outcome move in the firing phase cannot move, but as mentioned in the previous episode, they can move if they were only driven back in the firing phase. Movement is made by individual units or as brigade groups, which we'll talk about a bit later. Units in march column can move double distance on a road if they're outside of 6 MU for the whole move from enemy. And then units can also make a second move, which requires a CMT, again if both moves stay outside of 6 MU of all enemy, and that excludes LOCs and enemy LOCs and commanders. And then it's worth noting wavering units cannot move closer to enemy within 10 MU. So how do you wheel and how do you slide? So wheeling, Unit A wants to get to position A1. The distance of the wheel is measured by a straight line, as you can see from the arrow, but it's important to note that the unit must wheel around its front corner. So you measure the furthest distance from the outside corner on the left, but the unit must wheel around its front corner. So you can see in the picture with B and B1, that would be an illegal move because it's the right corner has slid backwards. Troops obviously couldn't move backwards like that, they would pivot around the inside corner. Sliding, there are 3 ways you can slide. The most common one, I suppose, would be sliding outside. You can slide up to 1 base width every move if you're outside of 6 MU from enemy, and so long as both front corners move at least 3 MU. So for instance, if you're doing a double move to get across the table, each of those moves you could slide by 1 base width. The other way you could slide is simply to avoid friends, table edges or slowing terrain. This doesn't have to be 6 MU from enemy, this can be wherever, but it makes movement a little bit easier. You can avoid friends, table edges or terrain that'll slow you down. And then the third way you can slide is with a complex move test. Here the unit stands stationary and then just slides 1 base to the side, to the left or the right, as it may be. So that's the 3 ways to slide. What about moving backwards and changing facings? So moving backwards, all troops can move backwards, and that move they can end facing the front or the rear. And it's slightly different for irregular lights. It's a simple move for irregular lights, and they can make up to a full move backwards. Whereas all other troops, it's a complex move to move backwards, and they can only go back by half a move. And remember, they could keep their facing, so still face forward, or they can end facing backwards. Worth noting that a unit that ends a move further from enemy than they started needs to take a cohesion test if the enemy was non-wavering and were within 6 MU of the unit moving backwards. And if either the unit that's moving backwards took a CMT to move backwards, or there were enemy behind flank within 6 MU. What about changing facing? So a unit can turn to face any direction while otherwise remaining stationary and in the same formation. It simply pivots around the central point. So you can see in this diagram, the unit sort of drawn that white circle. The unit can spin in any direction around the 360. In this case, it's wheeled about 45 degrees to the left, and it's a simple move unless you're within 2 MU of enemy, or if the unit that's pivoting is unlimbered artillery, in which case it would be a complex move. And then it's just important to note the unit must still maintain its distance from the nearest enemy after it's done the move. So you can see in the picture the unit's pivoted and then it's slid slightly forward just to maintain the distance from the nearest enemy. Limbering and unlimbering artillery. So unlimbering is a formation change, but it's a simple move unless within 2 MU of enemy, because all changes of formation within 2 MU of enemy are complex. So a few rules about it. So no part of the unlimbered unit can be further forward than the front edge of the limbered model. So the yellow dotted line there is where the limbered model was, and the green line is the front edge. So no part of the unlimbered unit can go further forward than that green line. In addition, the unlimbered unit must have one corner touching the limbered model's front edge or front corner. At least one corner must touch that front edge or corner. And then no unlimbered base can be further than 1 MU from some part of the original limbered model. Limbering, slightly different. So it's a formation change and it's a complex move. And there are 4 possible options for how to limber a model. So in the diagram, the yellow dotted line is where the unlimbered unit was. First option, you can limber facing forward with the front edge in place of one of the unlimbered bases. The second option is almost the opposite, so facing backward and the rear edge of the unlimbered model in place of one of the unlimbered bases. Then you could face to the right, and here you can see the front edge and left corners aligned with the unlimbered model's front edge and corner, and the other way around, facing to the left and aligned with the unlimbered model's left edge and corner. So quite simple, but those are only 4 ways you can limber. What about moving through friendly units? So the rule is you have to be able to get, you have to reach the other side or get halfway through the unit. So how does that work in some examples? So in this example, A can move through B and C because A gets at least halfway through and there's space on the other side. And there would be no CMT required if A and B were from the same division. So it's not a complex move if everything moving through is from the same division, or if the troops you're moving through are artillery. So there you can see A reaches the far side, and it's a simple move if they're all from the same division. However, in the assault phase, any movement through friendly units in the assault phase always requires a CMT, whether they're from the same division or not, whether you're moving through artillery or not. It's always complex to assault, to interpenetrate or move through friends in an assault move. In this example, A cannot move through B as a full move doesn't get at least halfway through B. So there you can see it reaches not quite the halfway point, so then it's not allowed to pass through. In this example, the move to get through while A gets halfway into B, to get to the other side would require a move of more than 50% of A's normal move distance in that terrain. So here again, it wouldn't be allowed. You can't use it to extend your move by more than 50%. Finally, here's an example of an assault. So A can assault D through B, obviously with requiring a CMT. And even though there's insufficient space, the rule does allow B to move backwards by up to 1 base depth to create space for A. So there you can see A gets through, but it's covering the front bases of B, and so B is simply moved back to where the green arrows, where the green dotted box is, and that makes space. If there wasn't enough space for B to shift back, so there was another unit in the way, or a table edge, or it needed more than a base depth to shift back, then that wouldn't be allowed. Right, then moving as a brigade group. So brigade groups are useful. It's a group of units. It's useful to move because you use one complex move test to move multiple units. So therefore you only need to use one command point to do multiple complex things. But there are only certain things you can do as a brigade group, which I'll talk about. So what are the requirements to be a brigade group? All units must be in the same division, and they must be accompanied by their divisional commander, as in attached. The group cannot include both infantry and cavalry, so it could be infantry with guns or cavalry with guns, but it can't be infantry with cavalry. The units must all be in partial edge-to-edge contact, and they must all be facing in the same direction. They cannot be in difficult terrain unless they're going through it on a road in a column. And the group cannot change formation or facing except to move backwards as a group. The size of the group is limited by the level of the general, so a competent general can only have 2 units in his brigade group, a skilled 3 units, and an exceptional 4 units. So looking at the example on the left here, let's assume they're all in the same division and that Commander F is competent. Possible groups could be A and D, could be A and B, A and C. E obviously can't be part of the group because they're cavalry with infantry, and the group is limited to 2 units because F is competent. If he was exceptional, then A, B, C and D could all actually be part of the brigade group, so exceptional generals can move big groups of troops around. And then getting on to complex moves. So complex moves, it's important to the different tests to be taken in the assault phase and the movement phase. Each complex move test requires a command point, and on the table below, in the diagram there, each line in the table is a separate CMT, so it requires a CP. So if you were wanting to do 2 things on the line there, so assaulting, for example, interpenetrating in an assault and assaulting while out of command range, you would need 2 separate tests and 2 separate command points. The test, here's the table that you want to find about how to take the test. The number of dice depends on whether your unit is veteran, drilled, conscript or irregular. Veterans getting 3 dice, all the way down to conscripts and irregulars only getting 1 dice. How many command points do you need? Usually it's 1 command point, but if you're out of command range of your general, your commander, then it's 2 command points. Most tests need a 5 to pass, but it's a bit easier if your commander is leading the unit, so if he's attached to the unit, then you only need a 4. And then if your unit is superior or poor, you'd re-roll 1s or 6s. The important point to note is that complex move tests are passed automatically outside of 6MU from enemy. So it's a mechanism to speed up the game. Basically all you need are command points, and if you're veteran, your first complex move you need no command points. If you're drilled, you need 1 command point, or if it's a second complex move for veterans, it's 1 command point. And then conscripts and irregulars need 2 command points, with an additional 1 if you're outside of command range of your general for all of those. Some points to note on CMTs. Units that fail a CMT can still move, so they can still make a complex move. Once a unit has dice for a CMT, it must make its move. So even if you fail your test, you need to make whatever move you want to make. You can't take your CMT, pass it or fail it, and then go back and move another unit, and then only come back and move your unit later. You need to finish the move of the unit that you've diced for. and you need to, if it needs to take 2 CMTs, you need to complete the first move before you test for the second CMT. Commanders must be in range at the start of the unit's move, not the start of the turn. So a commander could be out of range at the start of the movement phase and then move into range, and then the unit moves and it counts as if it's in range. But if you want to count the benefit of the commander being attached to the unit, he would have had to have been attached from the start of the movement phase. It's also worth noting that the unit can make multiple CMTs in a turn, but as I mentioned, but if it fails its first CMT, it cannot test for another that turn. So if you wanted to test to charge out of command range and interpenetrate enemy, let's say you test for the to charge out of command range and you fail that test, you don't get another chance to test for interpenetrating. And if you're taking a CMT as a brigade group, you do it as the lowest elan unit in the group. So if you've got conscripts mixed in with veterans, you'd only have 1 dice for to test for the CMT, the 1 dice being for the conscripts. And that's it for movement. In the next episode, we'll be talking about the combat phase.